Okay, so we got a lot of experts that seem to know everything about engines. So what I want to talk about is HEMI valve seats, not just CVHs, but third gen HEMIs and engines of the sort. So what happens here? What's the cause? What's the failure? What's the failure mode? Now this all goes back to this head. This is a split port head off of a 97, right? So the CVH was originally designed by Roush, you know, the Roush Mustang guy, and the Chrysler stuff was partially having to do with Iacocca. So those guys are obviously a bunch of fucking morons, right? They're idiots. They don't know what they're doing. So, first of all, these engines were never, ever, ever designed to last 30 years. Okay? The fact that they did, these are throwaway grocery getter cars. They're econo boxes, you know, whatever metaphor you want to use for them. The fact that they survived this long is a fucking anomaly, okay? So, the difference between these, we'll just refer to all of these CVHs and HEMIs as HEMIs, because it's obviously a HEMI. If you take a third-gen HEMI head and set it right next to it, it's basically the same. There's a couple differences, like the CVH has D ports, and it has split ports on the split port motor, but for all intents and purposes, these are the same engines, so we're going to refer to these as HEMIs. Okay, so say you take one of these and you compare it next to a BP, right, or a fucking K24 or any of those high revving engines. Those engines are designed for two completely different purposes, right? Right. So these little HEMI heads, just like the third gen HEMIs, just like the HEMIs of the 60s and the 50s, they were designed for low end power. And honestly, the original HEMIs from the 50s, they ran like dog shit. They fucking sucked balls. They were not a reliable engine to drive around. They were full of tuning problems. But due to the inherent design of the plane of the intake swirl exhaust, they worked really well in forced induction, which is why you see the 1.9 and the split port, which I have all those extra pieces out in the shed. I didn't want to dig them out for this. They have long, equal length runners. It's because that is how these engines were originally designed to work. So if you see in some of the original 426 wedge and even the 413s, they had what they called a ram charger intake, which had, I think it was 2.5 or 3 foot long runners. It's because the guys that actually designed these were fucking morons, remember? So what we have here is a Escort, right? But it happens to have a 1.8 inch intake valve. That's pretty big considering the fact that the third gen HEMI is a 2-inch intake valve. So this is only 300,000 smaller than a third gen HEMI. Okay, so what is the difference here, right? What are we getting at? So if you have a larger valve, it's got more weight to it, it's slower to move, you need heavier valve springs. But what benefit does that give you? Well, it's all about thermal mass. The bigger the mass is, the more heat it can absorb and the more heat it can dissipate. And also the more it could flow, right? So when you're sucking, your air's coming in, it creates a vacuum inside there. The easier you can get this air in there, the easier and the more efficient, the more volumetric efficient the entire operation is. Okay? So when you have a tiny little itty bitty valve that doesn't flow as much, you have to have two of them to compensate. So you have two little itty bitty valves that they have a chance of getting hot, really hot, which is why a lot of them are filled with sodium. A sodium-filled valve, it's because sodium gets so hot it liquefies, and that absorbs the heat inside the stem instead of dissipating it on the seat. Right? That's what the seat is for. The seat is, well, obviously it's for sealing, but it's also for dissipating heat, absorbing the heat. That's why there's coolant passages all the way around these seats, is to suck up that heat. So these engines were designed for a higher volumetric efficiency with less RPM, because as we know, horsepower is a function of torque over time. So just because you make more horsepower doesn't mean you're actually making any more power. All it does is mean that you can spin your engine faster, more RPMs, right? Like this guy right here. That's what that's designed for. It's designed to spin the crap out of it. That's what that's for. So these engines, just like the 3rd gen HEMIs, just like the 1st gen HEMIs, just like the 2nd gen HEMIs, they were designed for a lower RPM range. It's because they make torque. Torque is the key. It's what actually does the work. Okay? So all of these functions are coming together to basically say you're comparing something that's designed to actually do work compared to something that only makes power in a specific RPM range. You think grandma gives a fuck about how much fucking RPM she gets out of her car when she goes down to pick up her prescription? No. That's what these cars were designed for. They were designed to put 4 passengers in them, load them with some fucking shit in the back, and take them to the beach. They weren't designed to run 8-second fucking passes at the drag strip. Okay? So you're saying, big turbo! Woo! Yeah, that was designed for a specific application. Okay, so you can't compare that to this. So what I'm getting at here is a lot of guys nowadays don't realize that, you know, most of these are 30 years old. They're getting close to. The 1.9s are 30 years old. And they say, oh, can't believe you bought that junk. Just swap it. Just swap it. Swap it for a Z-Tech BP swap it because they drop valve seats. Well, yeah, as you can see from here, this is why I have this head, is because guess what? It dropped a valve seat, right? You see it's missing. And those chunks come up through the intake all the way around due to the way the scavenging works, and those chunks got into this cylinder. So we'll also talk about that myth here too, because obviously we have case in point proof that that actually happens. So when you get those papers with your reman heads, which I thought I had one sitting up here, but I did some cleaning yesterday, that says you must replace the intake or you avoid the warranty. Well, it's because of this crap. So what happened here? What happens? How does this happen? Well, we know from our metallurgy classes that we took, because we're all fucking physicists and we know everything about how engines work. We know that different metals expand and contract at different rates, right? So most aluminums expand 1/1000th of an inch per 100 degrees per foot, right? Okay. So say, for example, you got a thermostat housing like this one, where the bolts are just rusted out and, you know, nobody's taking care of the coolant and it's all rusted, and one of a couple things happens. Either one, you have a leak and the thing overheats because there's no coolant in it. 2, the thermostat sticks shut or breaks or pops and allows it to overheat. But there was a failsafe built into these. On the CVH heads, there's a big-ass thermostat housing that had a wax pellet in it. And so what would happen is, when it would get too hot, that wax pellet would melt and it caused it to bypass constantly. So some people would say, oh, my car doesn't get warm in winter. Well, yeah, it's because you fucking overheated it, and now it won't heat up at all because it's trying to preserve its own life. Okay, so it overheats, right? The aluminum expands, the valve seat walks its way out a little bit, it walks its way a little bit more, it starts to misfire. Sometimes they'll seat themselves back in. I've seen them where they've walked in and out a couple, 2, 3, 4 times before they've came out. So what happens is, usually it's after it gets hot and it's shut off. Then somebody comes out and starts it, and that piston comes up and fucking hits that thing, and it destroys that valve seat. And you get all these little chunks in here. That's what that is, little pieces of hardened valve seat that have beaten this head up. So then people say, oh, well, this thing's junk. Oh yeah, tell me more about how your 30-year-old car that you didn't take care of, that wasn't even designed to live this long, is a fucking piece of shit. Let's talk about it. Okay? So, neglect. Most of it is neglect, poor maintenance, improper care, and just, in general, treating your vehicle like crap. Okay? So, this one you can see has got some boo-boos in it, and you can see how this chamber looks a little bit different than this. This is part of a project that's coming up that some of y'all are going to see. Some of y'all may have already heard about it, but see, there's the good head. So, saying, okay, well, what about other engines? What, you know, we're just talking about this here. Okay, this is just a split port head. I paid $50 for this hunk of junk because I wanted to do some experimenting on it. So, what else do we got here? Let's see, we got an 05 Grand Cherokee here with the 3.7. This is another one, 3.7, 4.7, 5.7, that get a lot of bad reputation, a lot of bad rep points, because they drop valve seats. Guess what? This one's here. I paid 12 cents for this car, because guess what? It has a drop valve seat. You know why it has a drop valve seat? 2 reasons. One, water pump leaks, and they drove it until it fucking quit. Secondly, the radiator cap doesn't have any spring to it, so it was a compound failure. Was it because the engine's a piece of shit? Nope. These engines were designed by Mercedes. I mean, not saying that that's, you know, a bonus or any kudo points there, but these are damn good engines. And the only reason Chrysler discontinued the 318 and the 3.9, which is, you know, one of those, in case one of you's never seen a V8 before, that's what that is over there. Because they couldn't pass emissions, so they had to, when Daimler got involved with Chrysler and Mercedes, they came in and sucked out all of Chrysler's R&D money and left them with this crap. So this one's been sitting out in my yard for the last year or so until I could finally get to it because I'm busy. But yeah, I'm going to pull the heads off of this, which is going to take me about 3 hours. And I'm going to put a set of reman heads in it, and I'm going to turn around and sell this thing for $5,000. So, yeah, I guess my gain is their loss or whatever. But another case in point thing of neglect here. Somebody neglected it. They just, you know, it's like the Bic lighters. You know, you use them until they're out and you throw them away. That's what people do. They think, oh, well, you know, I don't have to put any money into it because it's a Honda, or I don't have to put any money into it because it's a Jeep. Well, you do. And the manufacturers have reprogrammed people to think that, you know, their vehicles have a less cost of ownership over the long run, so therefore you should buy that one instead of the other one. And then once the manufacturer warranty is up, they're junk because nobody did any maintenance to them because the manufacturers told them not to because it'll void the warranty, or because they want their car to seem cheaper than the other car. Right? You buy a car, you pay your monthly payments, and then once it's at 100,000 miles, when the warranty's up, you trade it in, and then you make another payment. Let's look at some other examples. Okay, here are my HEMI sisters. Both of these cars. This is a 11 Grand Cherokee Overland. It has air suspension, 5.7. And it's a HEMI, right? So, guess what I got this car for? I got it because it dropped the valve seat. Weird, right? What are the odds? Because somebody got rear-ended and it pushed him into another car and it poked a pinhole in the radiator. Just enough to where you could notice a little bit of steam, but they didn't really care and they just kept driving it because, you know, cars don't ever fail. So, dropped the valve seat out of it and I got it. Put some heads on it. See that nice shiny paint on there? Yep, those are Mopar reman heads. And I'm driving it. I've been driving this thing as my daily for the last 3 years, I think. This thing has the same towing capacity as a 1500 truck. It's got 15-inch discs on it. It's got all leather on the inside. Yep, pretty sweet. Yep, see, got my dash cam, all leather. It's got 11 speakers in it, rear entertainment cinema center, but you know, it's a piece of shit because it's got a HEMI in it, right? Another case in point example of just pure neglect. If they would have taken it directly to the body shop and they had fixed the coolant leak, which you can see I always put brand new shiny coolant caps on all of my cars once a year because that's what I do. People forget that the coolant system acts like a pressure cooker. The higher the pressure, the more heat it can take. If your coolant cap or your degas cap or whatever is bad, just like the 7.3 Fords and the 6 liters, it was a fucking poor design to begin with. Don't even get me started on that. But also the degas bottle was so remote from the engine that by the time the coolant started boiling inside the engine, it wasn't at high enough pressure. So it basically just fucking cooked them. Because, you know, well, we don't even start about Ford designs because I guess some of you guys know how I feel about Fords. But here we go. Another case in point. I mean, here's a $20,000 car that I paid less than $5,000 for, including the heads and the radiator and the bodywork. So, what do we have here? Oh, what is that? Is that another HEMI? And what is this? See, this is a 05. This is a 300, right? Yeah, looks like a 300. Oh, it's a HEMI. Okay. Oh, what does that say? Adverse wheel drivability. It's got some drivability problems with the wheels, apparently. Here we go. Yep, another case in point condition of failure. Guess what happened here? The customer brought it in. I told them that their water pump was bad, and they continued to drive it. They drove it to the point where the bearing in front of the water pump down here was so messed up that it actually ate a slot into the timing cover, which is... No, it's somewhere else. Anyway, so they just kept driving it, and eventually they brought it in because it was having trouble starting, because these original, the 05s, are still mostly Mercedes. I mean, this is a Mercedes 300, you know. So they have fail-safes built into them where if they get too hot, they just kind of stop running. So I told them after we put a timing cover, and we ended up putting a radiator in it because there was a tiny leak in the core, you know, kind of a all-encompassing repair. So I told him, hey, listen, this is what's going to happen. Either one or two things is going to happen. Either one, nothing will happen, or two, this thing's going to suck a valve within the next 6 months. 5 months, 23 days later, it came in with a sucked valve. This one right here sucked the intake valve out of it. So I bought this car for 50 bucks. And you see, this one's got 2 brand new shiny heads on it. So I paid 50 bucks for the car after they paid for all of the water pump and the timing cover and the radiator, and she actually put a transfer case in this, both front axles, control arms, rear pinion seal, rear output seals, and rear axle. So it's got all 4 axles in it, drive shaft. She paid for all that, and then she just got to the point where she didn't want to deal with it anymore because, you know, I don't know why. But anyway, I got this car for cheap, and I've been driving this. So all of these vehicles here are case in points of owner neglect. It's not so much that the car's a piece of shit. I mean, some of them just are. Some of them are just fucking plain pieces of shit. There's no getting around that. But to come in and say, oh yeah, your 30-year-old Escort, who was never designed for this, is a piece of shit because it has a possibility of sucking a valve, it's just ignorant. You guys need to educate yourselves some more. Put down the Facebook groups and go pick up a book and learn about engines and how they actually work. So, yeah, try and be helpful. Don't be a piece of shit when it comes to telling people stuff on the forums. Okay? Be part of the solution, not part of the problem. We're here to help people out. So, right. Later.